Welcome to the second podcast for Three Kings. Three Kings is a subreddit where we share our experiences following any kind of paranormal recipe or ritual, not just the titular Three Kings. Today we're going to talk about Black Eyed Kids. So you may have heard about Black Eyed Kids if you're into creepypasta, like I was. There was a time where I used to be a denizen of X. It's an infamous board in 4chan. And that's the first time when I heard about it. It's been a long time. And this is one of those legends that has sort of permeated the internet culture and just culture in general. People who hear it, there is something about it that makes people think of it in a very special light. It's not just like any other urban legend. In fact, if you search for the terms Black Eyed Kids, you find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. All related to it. A movie has been made, specials. So we're very honored today to have a person who posted one of the first experiences with this phenomenon. His name is Brian Bethel. He's a journalist. And we also have our co host, my friend Dapper. How are you, Dapper?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for having us. And Brian, thank you so much for joining us. We're probably your 100th podcast because it's been many years and you've been a guest of many shows, but we appreciate it all the same. Thank you for joining us, man.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks.
So yeah, so let's talk about this Black Eyed Kids phenomenon. In fact, before the show started, I was trying to do as much of a research as you could make about a subject like this, and I ran across the original entry. So I figured I might get things started by just putting that on the screen. By the way, if you're following the screen in Twitch TV/Fable Forge, then you should be seeing the monitor. I'm streaming one of the two monitors. And I found this in the Wayback Machine, archive.org. So this is 1998, folks. And you are here posting something for like a group, right? A discussion group. And this is where it all began. So, yeah, tell us about it, Brian.
Sure. Well, this actually happened around 1996. It got reposted a few times, either by myself or by other people. So the 1998 one is probably a repost, but I've tried to find the original, and I can't seem to find that.
I see.
In in but where this actually had its origin, the document is I was a member of a list serve, an email list serve devoted to ghost stories and people sharing paranormal experiences and that sort of thing. And that group had sort of spun out of a Usenet group. This tells you how far back that is because
Yes.
none of the people listening to your podcast probably know what Usenet is.
I,
but
I,
uh,
I, I don't think so. You and I are old
uh,
enough, but most people are
I'll,
not.
I'll call it pre-Reddit. Okay,
Exactly.
the
So like BBS days.
yeah
Takes me back.
yeah I would call it the yeah. So anyway, but we had this private email list where we could share and discuss people's experiences and stories in kind of a closed circle where people would feel sort of, I guess, a little more confident to share personal details and that sort of thing like that. And of course, this posting kind of leaked out from there, and then after a while, I just kind of had to own it because so many people were contacting me about it. But um, how it happened was I'm a newspaper reporter. I live in Abilene, Texas. That's pretty well known. I work for the same newspaper still. Right now, I cover city council and all kinds of other exciting things like that. So
Yes.
I write about roads and taxes and other things like that. Really, really paranormal stuff. And
No, but I mean, let me interrupt you here because I that's exactly what caught my attention. Like, this has obviously become an internet phenomenon, and it doesn't seem to me like you had any motivation to create an internet phenomenon. I read this whole thing, It sounds to me like you were sharing something that actually happened to you to a relatively smaller community, and somehow it spun out of here. And I don't think you meant it to spawn out of here.
No, this became viral before we had that terminology, I guess.
Exactly.
And that's kind of the interesting thing about it. So, um, I don't know if you want me to get into the story itself, but
No, no, no. The story. So here's the thing. I mean, the stories that usually are meant to go viral have something incredibly flashy, or like explosions in Michael Bay. This story, if you boil it down, it comes down to a couple of really creepy kids acting really creepily. To me,
yeah,
that lends it credibility, because if you wanted to make something up, you would make up something like dramatic. And
yeah,
so I'll let you tell the story, but I think I'll give the viewers like a very summarized Cliff Notes version, because and you'll correct me if I get any detail wrong. So if I understood correctly, you were on your way to pay your internet bill, of all things,
yes,
right?
yes,
and
yeah.
and, and the place where you pay your internet bill is near this movie theater playing Mortal Kombat. So far so good, everything is fine. It happened to be the last showing of Mortal Kombat, and it was already in progress. And as you were on your way back to the car, that's when you find these two kids. I'll call them that. About what time of the day was it? Would you say like 7, 8 p.m.?
Um, yeah, we're moving. We're in that kind of blue period where the sun is going down and you're at twilight, and so I needed the light from the theater marquee to fill out my check, and so I was actually in my car filling out my check, using the light from the marquee to do that.
From the marquee to do that. And these kids come in here, and I mean, normally you would think this is innocent. They innocently approach you, and apparently they want to ride. Basically, right? It says, "Mister, we have a problem. You see, my friend and I want to see the films, but we forgot our money. We need to go to our house to get it. Want to help us out?" So far, so good, right? I mean, what did you think in that moment, not knowing anything else at the time?
Well, it's interesting because you would normally think, I guess there were several things that happened sort of in rapid succession. There's the knock at my window. I look over, I see two kids standing outside. My first thought is that they're going to hit me up for money or something like that, but I crack the window a little bit. But then the in that very moment, nothing has happened. There's hardly been any communication at all. They just start talking to me. Well, the one kid who does all the talking starts talking to me,
Right.
and there is this instantaneous, icy cold fear that just comes straight through me. It's this absolutely terrible feeling of dread and terror, and
I see.
I it was just there from the
So
beginning.
even though they were saying perfectly innocent stuff, somehow the sensation was not perfectly innocent. Like something you could tell right away. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I I kind of pride myself a little bit on having some good intuition, so there was just something wrong about the situation. I in the paranormal experiences that I have had that I've described to people, I sort of this has happened numerous times where you sort of almost feel like reality takes sort of a little step to the left or right. I
Yes.
mean, you're not in normal consensus, what we would call consensus reality
Almost
anymore.
like you're in the shadow side or something.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
yes, I'll have to explain that reference. Oh my god, I don't want to take a detour. But Brian, let me ask you this. So it sounds like there's been a number of paranormal experiences that you've been through.
A few, and this was certainly the most dramatic one. We had when I was in journalism school in San Angelo, we had a building that was haunted, and we had a couple of encounters with the young lady who I fully believe haunts that place, and then some other things that have just happened in my life, and I've always had a deep and abiding interest in the paranormal. I kind of came out of the womb, I guess, that
Yeah.
way. And so I've done an awful lot of research, and I actually found your previous guest to be just completely fascinating.
Oh
He and I could
yes.
talk about chaos magic for days, but
No,
but
no.
anyway.
I hear you. Was this your first time that you experienced something that felt supernatural?
No, I would say not. There were some things that I had when I was a kid that were definitely in that
I see.
realm, and then the obviously I went to college and had the experiences at the newspaper offices in our journalism school.
So,
Um,
so maybe
but
do you think that had something to do with you recognizing the sensation right away? Like maybe because you had something in the past, you figure, oh, this is one of those times.
yeah, I do believe that, and I'm extremely grateful for that because that is something that has served me before and since. Just you once it happens to you, something happens, I think, to your perception of reality, and it literally changes, and you become a little bit, I think, more attuned to these sorts of things, and you're able, I believe, to sense them at a different level than you normally would, and you can force that. I mean, I think through things like studying paranormal and ritual and other things like that. Um, but to me,
Yeah.
I'm hearing strange voices.
No, I apologize. There's noise in the background.
Uh,
I hear what you're saying. I mean, I happen to found this podcast, Strange Chronicles from the Graveyard Shift, and some production value. So I'll give them credit. They actually film you at the scene where this all happened. So do you mind if I play this video? This is yourself from 2014,
sure, not
basically
at all. Yeah.
telling. So let's see. Let's take it from here. The sound is not the best. As you
Oh,
said, you were using the lights from the theater marquee to write down the check.
yeah.
You hear the knocking?
How tall would you say they were?
Okay,
They're normal
relatively
teenagers,
short kids.
basically what you would think.
So let me pause it here. The first thing I thought was, why didn't you see the eyes right away?
Well, and that is the question, and the only thing that I can come up with is yeah, I broke I broke their gaze. I mean, that's the only thing that I can think of. Later in the story, I deliberately break their gaze to look up at the marquee and read which movie is playing and then what time it's playing at. And so in that time that I looked away, and it was sort of like I had to force myself to look away from
I
them.
see.
I think that my brain, if I can go all Lovecrafty here, collated its contents, I suppose,
I see.
and and all of a sudden it was when I looked back, it's sort of like I noticed that final detail that was missing, and I don't know if that was deliberate obfuscation on their part, some sort of either magical or paranormal sort of thing that they were doing, or
Or
if it's just that.
subconsciously, maybe you
Yeah,
didn't want to see.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a whole lot of vectors that you could explore with that, but the good thing is that I did I did ultimately see it. So
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking. I mean, I have heard before, and this is not supernatural. Mages uses misdirections, like magic people on stage. They use misdirection all the time. They sort of control where you're looking at. But it makes me think, right? I mean, maybe these black eye kids, they didn't want you to notice that particular detail about them, and the fact that you notice feels like it wasn't part of the plan.
well, and that was definitely the case by the way they acted and reacted later, especially the one who was doing all the talking became visibly and I will say absolutely frighteningly angry. And that was
Yes.
yeah.
That's when it gets creepy, right? So let's continue here. This is gonna get to the part where they start to asking for stuff,
That's the most logical thing I can think of, and so I'm a little bit irritated by that. So I roll down my window a little bit and I say, "Can I help you?"
right?
And then this is when it starts to get strange. Only one of them spoke. Um, and my retellings of the story, I've nicknamed him the spokesman because of that. It's the curly-headed kid. And immediately I noticed that he's just very smooth in his delivery. A little too smooth for a child. But
Right.
also
And you
immediately,
notice that in this story also. In fact, that's one of the first things that you point out in your experience as a journalist. Every time that you talk to a child, they are, they are like children. They are awkward and they want to see the camera and they, act like you expect a very young child to act. This person, exactly here, this is the part I was looking for, right? Whereas these one somehow seem too mature, right? To be a kid, like it seemed unnormal. It's just unnatural.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, um the thing that I would compare it to is almost like the patter of a salesman in a way, and very rhythmic and hypnotic sort of speech pattern.
Yes,
Uh, Definitely not the way that a normal kid, somewhere between the ages of 9 to 12, would talk to a complete stranger that they've just approached in a parking lot.
exactly, exactly. So far, if there is any skeptic watching, they're probably thinking, well, okay, so the kid was very mature. So what? Well, let's continue. It's not just that.
there's
Let's
this
continue.
aura of absolute terror that begins to grip me. I am
Right,
completely frightened of these children. I have no idea why. It is not rational. They haven't even hardly said anything to me. But this fight or flight response immediately kicks in, and I remember being just absolutely terrified. So the
right,
spokesman comes up and says, "Hey, mister, we forgot our money, and we want to see the movie. So can you give us a ride to our mom's house?"
uh,
And so I start questioning them. Well, how far away do you live? Oh, it's not far. Don't worry, it won't take long. And then he starts saying, gets the idea apparently that I'm nervous because he starts saying, well, look, mister, we're not going to hurt you. This goes on, and I keep getting more and more and more frightened. Also, I've noticed a couple of times I've caught my hand kind of trying to stray toward the car door. I asked them, well, what movie are you planning to see tonight? And
Mortal
they say
Kombat.
Mortal Kombat, which kind of dates this. Uh,
I
so
remember it
I'm
was a good
looking.
Very
movie,
popular movie,
but the
yeah.
problem was it had already started. So the thing I noticed here is at no point you actually said yes. It seemed like they kept fishing over and over for you to say yes. Do you think there is any special significance to you giving them permission? Just giving them the official yes, I'll take you, or yes, come in, or sure.
Yeah, sure. Yes. I mean, and they even mentioned that um at sort of the apex of the story, I
Yes,
suppose.
at the end.
Because that he says pointedly that they cannot come into my car unless I tell them it's okay. And so yeah, I mean they are definitely trying to get permission from me to come inside.
So you know what this instantly makes me think of? Dapper, right? What's the name of the movie? Let the right one in. You know what I'm talking
Well,
about?
yeah, but that's vampires.
But
Left to
well,
Right
that's
Women was
well, well,
vampires.
well, that's exactly what it makes me think of. There is all these folklores about vampires not being allowed to enter a house unless they are being let in.
It
So
works with demons and protection circles too.
right, so that's where things. And here's the strange part. I don't know that you had that in mind until after. Is that right, Brian? Like you were not thinking of these connections until much after the story had happened.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, in the moment, all I know is that I'm terrified of a couple of kids that are approaching me in a parking lot. I don't know why, but I desperately, at some subconscious level, understand that I do not need to be interacting with them, and I definitely don't need to be letting them into my car. I understand that at a gut level, but I don't understand why at a conscious level.
I
And
see.
yeah, and it wasn't until after I actually got away from the situation and had to put all of this together that you really see the wider narrative emerge.
I see. I see. Let's continue.
Immortal Kombat is playing,
Right.
but then I look down at my clock in the car. Okay, Mortal Kombat is already showing. It's the last showing of the night.
Mm-hmm.
If I take these kids anywhere and bring them back, they're going to see at most 20 minutes of a movie before it's over. So I know immediately that something is not clicking together properly. I looked away, and then when I looked back at them, that's when I saw finally what my brain was trying to tell me.
Ah,
Both of them had coal black eyes, completely black.
Couldn't see any iris.
Nope.
Couldn't see anything.
Nothing at all. Just these big black orbs.
so when I saw this part, the question that came to my head was, were their eyes black all along, and you only notice it now, or were their eyes maybe normal looking and maybe they changed and that's what you noticed?
That I'm really not sure. From other accounts that I've heard from people who have seen them, I think that they were probably that all along, but it's difficult to know if it literally changed or if they were black all the time. Other people who I've talked to, and I've talked to probably a couple of hundred at this point,
Yes,
who have claimed to have seen them. Um, the eyes are the things that they immediately notice about them, and then but then again, some people, it's not. So it's just difficult to say. So
and it's worth pointing out here that it was certainly dark. I mean, you needed the light of the marquee to write down the check, so it
right.
wasn't exactly daylight. So I understand. So here's the part. So you see their black eyes. Let's continue.
Night. Now, I mean, I felt like this cold rush into me that, but this wasn't an external cold. This was more of an internal cold that flooded into me. And I knew that at that point I was in the presence of something otherworldly. Um, and I knew that I had to escape. And if I didn't escape, I would die. I knew that.
That was the overall feeling that
Yes.
So instantly death, like not even hurt, pain, or anything negative. Is just, if I don't move out of here, I'm dead.
Exactly. And I knew that. I mean, I knew that at a very deep and primal level at that point. I don't know how to explain how I knew it other than just again that sense of intuition and whatnot. But
Yeah. No,
it
it's I think it's the lizard brain. Have you heard that term before? Like,
sure, yes,
yeah,
yes,
it's the, fight or flight response. It gets triggered at a very primal level, and it's almost biological. Like it's not like an intellectual thing that you rationalize and, oh, therefore logic dictates. It's like, no, you have this feeling,
right,
you have to
right.
act on
No,
it.
these things were definitely predatory, and that was something that a very deep part of me understood immediately and was reacting to.
I see.
Yes.
All right, let's finish the
you
story.
had to get away at that moment.
Um,
Right.
so I made some excuse. I said, sorry kids, I forgot something, I've got to go get it. I hope you find a ride. And I began to roll up the window, but he starts pounding on the window hard enough that
There. That's what I wanted the skeptics to hear, if any are listening. Normal kids don't do that.
No.
Normal kids don't do that. Like, up until this point, right? Oh, it was dark, didn't see the eyes, who knows? And polite kid, there's polite kids. Pounding on the window of a stranger who's trying to get away. Whoa. Whoa, yeah, that doesn't happen. Let's
I
finish.
actually worried about the glass.
Yes.
It felt like the car was moving.
How many, just real quick, how many cars were in the parking lot at that time?
Hardly any. There may have been people at the concession stand. Freckle-faced kid in the background looks absolutely confused.
Yeah, this wasn't supposed to
Mister,
happen.
we can't come inside your car unless you tell us it's okay.
Ooh, that's
I drove
creepy
in
as hell.
reverse, walking out of here, probably at that exit over there. I look back in my rearview mirror. I can't see it.
Jesus. So there you have it. Is like I said, if this was the kind of thing that was meant to go viral, it wouldn't be just that. Like, you would have thrown a Michael Bay explosion there somewhere. And the fact that it ends in you just living in the car, to me, that lends it credibility. Yeah, that's what I said at the beginning. I firmly still believe it. So let's start with what happened afterwards. Was this the last time that you had any encounter with a black eye kid?
It's the only time, and I am immensely, immensely grateful for that. Um, immediately after this was over, I rocketed back to my apartment. I literally ran from my car to my apartment door, um, went inside, locked every lock I could possibly find, and just literally. I mean, I know that this is something people would say dramatically and whatnot, but I mean, I literally collapsed on the floor,
Yeah.
and I was absolutely terrified because at this point, I don't know what I've seen, and also I don't know what they're capable of either. I mean, I don't know if they're going to be waiting in my apartment when I go inside. I mean,
Right, right. No, and that is also biological. So after the flight or fight response, the adrenaline, is flushing through your system, and at the end, is you feel this tiredness, this exhaustion, this I made it. Now let me collapse, and then you fall in bed, basically. Right. So that's the normal reaction, I think.
sure. And so I started thinking about, okay, I need to talk to someone about this. And so I have a friend of mine who I'm still friends with to this day,
Right.
who is very interested in paranormal topics and all that sort of thing. He's a buddy of mine. And I called him up. My friend Chad was still in school. He was getting his first graduate degree. He's a studied psychology, and so I wanted to talk to him because I knew that he would understand both from just a psychological perspective of what I was going through, and then also he would be open to just the high strangeness of it. And so this is where we get the Twilight Zone twist ending to this story, I
Yeah.
guess, to me, because at the time he was sort of seeing this girl who sort of claimed to be a psychic and all that sort of thing like that, and he put me on speakerphone. She was there with him. I told the story, and even before I got to the end, this girl stops me and she says, "Did these kids have all black eyes?" And I'm just blown away because this is not anything that I was expecting. So I
Right.
said,
And it's
"Yeah,
a detail that you had purposefully omitted. Right? It's not like you gave her any clues. She guessed it, and realized, we see it wasn't really a guess. Like, actually, she had a dream about it.
right, yeah." And so she tells me that she had a dream about black-eyed children uh, recently, and she tells me this straight up: if you had let them into your car, you would be dead now.
Yeah. Yep. They would have killed you
And
too.
And so it's just at that point that is confirming every single thing that I that I am feeling And also, here is this person who I don't even know. I met her once in the
Yeah.
entire time that they were hanging out together later. And all of a sudden, this is the first thing she says to me.
No,
I mean,
that is creepy because that is not the kind of detail that you would just guess, right? That is something incredibly specific.
yeah,
And this is why I think it's erroneous when people call you like the creator of the black, because first of all, when you say creator, that implies it's fiction, and I don't think that's the case. And second of all, I don't think it starts here. I mean, clearly she had dreamed about it before, and if I understand correctly, you've been researching other people who have been seeing these things, some even before you. Is that right?
yes. I've been very fortunate in the time since that, as the internet has developed, and especially as we've gotten into the era of social media and other things like that, that um, uh, I have been in touch with people who are researchers and other people. And from the moment this story appeared on the internet, literally dozens and dozens and dozens of people. I still get probably 2 or 3 emails a week about this.
Wow.
Um, Contact me, and a lot of them ask the same basic questions. What were they? Did you see him again? All that sort of thing like that.
Right.
But there's a significant portion that want to share a story of their own, and some of these people have seen them decades before me. And then when I started getting in touch with researchers like Jason Offutt and especially David Weatherly, who's written, I think, probably the best book on the phenomenon, um, he has confirmed to my satisfaction that not only is this an archetype that stretches back who knows how long, but we have very good and well documented sightings of things like this. I mean, going back to the 50s, the 30s, I mean, all kinds of things like that. So, no, I didn't create the black eyed kids.
Exactly.
I was there at a crossroads in the history of the internet where things were able to be disseminated enough and go through, as I said, become viral before we understood that term. Um, I happen to be the probably the example of it on the internet, but I am not the person who
Yeah, you were
these.
not the first one. You were the first to go viral because the internet was blowing up at the time, right?
Yes,
And
exactly.
so there's that's another thing that I find quite peculiar. Like, it's not that some people see red eye kids and others see yellow kids, and like it's a very specific detail that it seems to be common across people that had not necessarily heard this tale before. Yeah, so it seems like it's a case of multiple observers observing the same thing independently.
Exactly. And that to me is the interesting thing. And over time, I think that you learn to kind of read the stories that are um, copy pasta. Let's just call them what they are. I mean,
Jesus, and
pretty,
there is a lot of them. Look at this. Jesus
uh,
Christ.
and and I always try to sort of look at them objectively, just as I would with any other thing that I'm looking at, and try to say, okay, well, this one very much follows quote unquote the template, because just like we now have a sort of a template for alien abduction stories, for example, that started with Betty and Barney Hill and now goes forward to the present day. We have a sort of archetypal black-eyed kid encounter, and the stuff that adheres too closely to it, sometimes I'll take a step back and say, well, okay, maybe not. The ones that really intrigue me are the ones with strange details or very specific details, or just kind of interesting little things in there that add to me the verisimilitude of reality about it,
So
because Yeah.
let's try to write down what we know so far, because how many people have you talked to, would you guess? Like, just throw a ballpark number. People who have
Oh,
had experiences with black eye kids.
um, gosh, I would say probably I know more than 100.
So
Um,
that's a lot of data points, right? In statistics, if something happened 15 times, we consider that statistically significant. So if you have a data pool of 100, if you have a population of 100, that's pretty good. We can start to look for patterns, right? So let's see. I hope I don't get over my bridges here in trying to type some few things here that we have in common. But what do black eye kids have in common? Well, one of them is the black eyes. The other one is their kids. What else? What else is a common pattern that you have observed?
um, a lot of people describe um, it varies, but everyone mentions speech patterns. Um, it's sometimes they're a little stilted and archaic. Other times they're very like the guy I encountered, very patterned and sort of eloquent. But generally, there is something strange about their speech, that they don't have the normal cadence and diction that you would expect a child to have. So
The
that's
very good, very good. Another point worth mentioning: is it a pattern that all of them want to be let in? Are all of them asking for permission? Is that a pattern?
that is generally a pattern. Yes, it does appear that this is that they follow some sort of metaphysical rule set, I guess, is the best way to describe it. That they have to that there's an invitation that has to be extended to them to enter into someone's personal space. And
Interesting. Now, when they ask you to let them in, you clearly had the feeling that if you did that, you would die, right? And that's the same thing that the friend said. Is that also happening in other stories? Or, God forbid, have they been cases where they were let in and the people did die?
there are a couple of very interesting cases that you will find on the internet. There's one in particular that, and I've tried and tried to get in touch with the people who wrote this, and I've not been successful. So if there's anyone out there who's willing to help me with this vector, I would really love it. There's one in particular about how they supposedly did let them in, and then they actually did use the telephone. They asked to use the telephone, and then all of a sudden, outside, after a little while, there's a person in a black car that pulls up, and they get in the car and they leave.
Wow.
and, but then what happens after that is the strange part, because then apparently the man and the woman who let them in become incredibly sick. Um, and one of them even ends up with, I believe, a cancer. And they, again, who knows if this is true or not? I really want it to be. Well, okay, I don't want it to be true
Yeah, of
because people
course.
were harmed, but I want it to be true because this is a fascinating thing. Because if I remember properly, I'd have to look it up. The type of cancer that the man is diagnosed with is akin to people who have been exposed to high levels of radiation.
Hmm.
And to me, if that's true, then that's
That's
absolutely
that's an interesting
fascinating.
angle. That's an interesting angle. So, okay, what do they want? I mean, you've talked to hundreds of people about it. What do they want? They want to be let in. Why? To kill you. Why?
Well, there is a good question there. When I encountered them, they told me that they wanted to go to their mother's house, and that was something that I remember very very much. Was um, we want to go to our mother's house, and it wasn't just we want to go see our mom. It was there was almost in my mind I could almost see the capital letters. Okay, our mother. And I don't know why I believe that, but it just feels to be intuitively true to me that I don't know if they serve some sort of greater entity. I don't know if they just feed off of the fear and the life force of regular people in some methodology a la vampires. Um, they seem to
I think
be,
I think that's
yeah,
the best angle of all, Brian. I'm gonna tell you a theory. I'm sure this is not the first time you thought about it, but I'll tell you anyway. Let's imagine. Let's just speculate wildly here for a moment. Let's imagine that these creatures actually are evil creatures, and they certainly kill everyone who lets them in. But what they want to do is they want to feed on fear. So, what would be their reaction to a person who has turned this story into literally hundreds of books and a movie? There's a movie coming out. It's in pre-production. I saw it in IMDb, and there was another movie that was made before, right? And like fear has multiplied, my friend. Would they have?
exact.
Do they have now that much more to eat? If that's what they wanted, and is that the reason why they've never seen you again? Because I mean, if they did, it would be with a basket of gifts. You know.
Okay.
Thank you for generating so much fear. It's
I
delicious.
I I'll go there with you. I've worried that in some weird way I've done their work. Um,
Interesting.
I have worried about that because, um, again, I was for whatever reason. Not that I'm saying anything special about me, but I was the right person at the right time with the right tool, whatever. Um, and somehow this got out, and now it's a cultural phenomena. And one thing that I will clarify just for people, because I get this question sometimes, I have made not a dime off of
Yes.
anything BEK related, comic books, movies, all this sort of thing like that. There's been no check forthcoming. So
No,
there's
that is important to point out because that is the first thing that a skeptic would want to know. Is like, hey, cui bono, right? I mean, why do we have this story coming out? Oh, because obviously someone's making money from it. No, it has not happened. I
right. And this is not what and this is also not the sort of thing that a professional journalist would necessarily want to be the first thing that people associate with them either. Okay.
if anything, it sort of hurts you a little bit professionally.
Thankfully it hasn't. I've kind of gotten to the point, especially in my community, where I'm a known quantity. I'm trusted. My accuracy is something that people value, and I I I try to just do a good job and let my work stand on its
Thankfully,
own,
that's very good. That
and that has happened. But the
that
but
restores
yeah,
my faith in humanity a little bit. But
but
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
but to answer your question, yes, I mean I have worried because all right, this is out there now at a wider level than perhaps it would have been. Now, I mean, I don't know. Maybe eventually someone would have had some sort of interesting encounter with them or whatever and shared it, and it would have proliferated. But this was almost like a smart bomb in a way, thrown at exactly the right moment
Yes.
to do this. And I have wondered, am I a tool in this? Was this
Yeah,
inadvertent?
are you helping in some way? So I will share with you a little bit of my experiences. So I had a few of them, and they were creepy on their own. And what I did is that I started to write fiction about them. So I started to just write stories, and by turning them, the things that had happened to me, by turning them into fiction, somehow it took the bite out of it a little bit. And one of the fiction that I wrote is actually a game, and in that game I made a theory that these supernatural creatures, these beings, are mostly created out of belief, right? They are creatures of the mind, so to speak, and faith makes them stronger. And like I said, it's fiction, it's a game, I wrote it. But when I started the Three Kings subreddit, I started talking to a lot of people who do rituals like very seriously. And what they said to me, which surprised me a little bit, is that faith and belief actually are very strong components to make things work, right? And if you believe that something is a certain way, then even if it wasn't, it becomes that certain way because it's powered by your belief. So
Sure.
if we take this theory further, then you can think of any sort of spiritual entity out there that was looking for these amounts of belief in order to manifest itself into a particular shape. And if it could get a large group of people to give them that particular shape and those specific details, maybe that helps it sort of coagulate into that
Sure.
particular form.
Well, if I can tie this into your previous podcast,
Yeah,
which I did listen to before,
right.
um, this actually spun me off in a direction where I began to study Western occultism, chaos magic, and all kinds of other sorts of metaphysical systems very seriously. To that point, I may have read the occasional book or that sort of thing, but I really wanted to understand because it felt like that there were mechanics involved here
Uh huh.
that, and I really wanted to understand how this works and why it works and what I experienced and why this particular thing happened. And so, yeah, I mean, I started looking into things that would be familiar to some of your listeners. Everything from thought forums,
Yes.
tulpas, egregores. I mean, all these sorts of things like that. And um, I don't know that these. I have, like I said, evidence that these things were not generated from my personal consciousness, but I mean, it's certainly possible that if they're looking for fuel, if they're looking for purpose, or if they're looking for whatever, I mean that now there's this engine that's built for them, and it's
Yes.
that does bother me, but
No, no, I understand. I sure hope you don't feel in any way responsible for it, because I don't. Here's the way I see it. Like, sometimes I ask myself, if I were to travel back in time and for whatever weird reason assassinate Isaac Newton, does that mean we don't have the theory of gravity? No, no, it doesn't mean that. It just means that someone else would have invented it maybe a year later, right?
sure,
So this thing. So if you hadn't been there at that parking lot, then maybe someone else would have been in a different town in a different state, right? And and
sure,
and, and we would be where we are now. So I don't think you have particular responsibility for it, but I do think it's an interesting theory that if these spiritual beings are looking for the power of belief in order to take a particular shape, right, whether it's an egregore or something related to these tulpas or thought forms, etc., then they got it in spades. They got it in spades. And I said to a friend of that theory, and he said, that's funny and all, and that's creepy, and just good job for creative thinking, etc. He said, but if that was real, then Batman would be real. you know
sure,
because a lot more people believe in Batman than in any of these, or Superman, or any of those comic book heroes. And I thought he made a good point, but then I thought about it and I said, well, what if it is like some people have compared our modern comic book heroes to the mythological characters that used to exist in ancient Greece, right? And it's like basically new mythologies. Humans are always creating mythologies to represent parts about ourselves. So
sure,
Batman represents one and Black Eyed Kids represents the other. I think it's very
sure.
feasible.
And if people are interested in that, there's a couple of good books out there. There's one by a friend of mine named Taylor Elwood, who it's called Pop Culture Magic, and then the other one is Our Gods Wear Spandex by a fellow who runs a pretty good blog called the Secret Sun, and both of those kind of deal with this idea of these recurring archetypes and how they manifest throughout reality and throughout time and that sort of thing. And it's pretty interesting stuff. So
I think we're getting to something there, and sometimes the stuff that happens in pop culture has very real consequences in real life. Like when Jaws came out, right, by Steven Spielberg, it actually had an effect on people going to the beach. And I'm not saying that's paranormal at all, but I'm just saying that it's an idea, right? Before things were viral on computers, they could also go viral on people's minds and just
ex-
spread a thought, right? Like the original definition of meme that Richard Hawkins talked about,
ex-
exactly. So let me ask you, what would you say has been the main impact on your life, from not just from having the experience, but from having told the experience and from having seen how your experience became this phenomenon in pop culture? How has that impacted you overall?
um well, like I said, on one hand, financially, not at all, and I'm perfectly fine with that. On the other hand, though, I have had the opportunity to meet and speak and get to know fascinating people, and I would include you among them.
Thank you.
Um, the This is such a very interesting thing, and it touches something inside of people who hear this story. It seems that there's a resonance there, and I think that that's the thing that's fascinating to me. I get all of these emails and all of these things from people who, a, on one hand, just want to know what they are and all that sort of thing, and I don't have a great complete answer for them even now, even all these years later. But that what's interesting to me is that, especially since I've started doing podcasts and things like that, and I'll be honest, I went through a time where I didn't really want to talk about this anymore.
Hmm.
I felt like I'd said everything that I needed to say on it, and it was just sort of um, redundant.
And we're very thankful for you coming for us today.
I appreciate it.
But I went, actually, what happened is that my wife and I went back out to the movie theater one afternoon, one Sunday afternoon, and she said that she wanted to record me telling this story at the place where it happened. And so we did that, and we talked about it, and something just finally clicked in my head again, and I said, I need to just really own this. I need to just really say, fine, this happened to me. It's undeniable that it happened to me. I will defend the fact that it happened till the day I die. And also, I feel like I've had, since that point, that's when I started agreeing to be on podcasts and do other things like that. I feel like my life has actually been in a weird way enriched because of this. Um, Not that I would wish to ever go through it again, and not that I would ever wish to have anyone experience it, but the connections that I've made, the people that I've talked to are remarkable. And
Yes.
I wouldn't have had that without this.
I
So
you answered the question before I ask it. My next question was going to be, has anything positive come out of this? And you just gave me that answer. You have met interesting people. You have made a connection with your wife. And there is one third thing that I see, and this is the most distant possible benefit I can think of. But imagine if somehow we were able to establish that this pop culture magic is a thing, right? If somehow this helped us walk in that direction, then we can use this pop culture magic for all kinds of positive things, not just Batman, right? Not just
sure.
superheroes. We can create this sort of general global awareness that can be applied from anything, from the fires in Australia to the slums of Baltimore, right? Everywhere that people believe there is something. And if we discover that actually that belief really turns into something, then we will have found a very powerful thing to do in our little world. and you will have helped.
Exactly. And in all of my study since then, and I've continued to sort of seriously study these topics since that point. I mean, that was again, I would say that that's another positive thing. That was really the point in time where I said, okay, you're interested in this stuff. What do you really understand about it, though? Let's
Mm.
buckle down and figure this out.
I see. I see. We have 5 minutes left, so if anyone in the chat wishes to ask Brian a question, the time to post it is now. In the meanwhile, anyone wishes to type anything. What I will say is that I experienced something very similar to what you went through, Brian, because at the time, 8 years ago, I posted this stories. I was just making stories in no sleep about things that happened to me, and it was sort of like a fun way to exorcise them out of my system. And I posted this one about Three Kings, and it sort of became not nearly as big as this, but it kind of took over the subreddit. And at one point, like the entire front page of No Sleep was just Three Kings this, Three Kings that. And I originally made the Three Kings subreddit kind of like to help No Sleep deal with the overflow of stories. And for years, actually, I started regretting that I had ever posted that because not every Three Kings story has a positive outcome. I happen to believe that it's mostly psychological. I don't think it's necessarily supernatural, but even psychological things can have negative effects. So I was feeling very guilty, and for many years, I completely neglected the subreddit. I did the bare minimum. I was a bad moderator. And lately, I mean, as last month, I came to a similar realization to the one that you described. I realized, wait a minute, there is 30,000 people in this subreddit, and they all have little pieces of the elephant. You know the analogy about the seven blind men and the elephant, right?
Sure.
So
Yes.
we're all trying to approach the truth from a different angle, and we are all brave enough to admit that science as it is today doesn't necessarily have all the answers. We're willing to search for truths a little bit beyond that. So I said, well, you know what? That's a positive thing. I'm gonna turn around. I'm gonna embrace this. I'm gonna make a podcast. I'm gonna talk to interesting people and see what truths we can learn. And our first podcast gave me that. My first podcast was when we talked about a ritual Sages of Four. At the time, we had no idea what the ritual was for. The ritual had the instructions. He said you have to do this and you have to do that, and this is sort of what you can expect. But it didn't say why, and it didn't say how it worked. And we had this guest on the air who did it, had a terrible outcome, and instead of running away, he did it like 8 more times until he figured out through trial and error things that the original recipe hadn't even mentioned. And when
Sure.
that happened, I realized, you know what? This is a positive thing. This is a good use of our time. We should do more of that and bring that to the world, you know?
Well, I can't go. If you're me, you can't go a week without mentioning good old Aleister Curley. But
Yeah, that's fine.
uh, Thelema, and I'm not a Thelemite, but one of the things that Crowley said that did deeply resonate with me was that he was attempting to use the method of science to understand the aim of religion. And your previous guest talked about the magical diary and all that sort of thing like that, writing this stuff down, the value of creating records and that sort of thing like that. And I think to me that's what people like you and I or other people out there are trying to do. We're trying to um, even just the simple act of writing these things down, sharing them, sharing common experiences, learning from each other, all these things like that. We're holding this up to the light and we're trying to
Yes.
look at all the facets and see and figure this stuff out. And I think that that's a noble thing
No, I,
ultimately.
I, I agree 100%. And we certainly don't have the answers. We're humbly admitting that we don't know all there is to know. And in that sense, we're no different from people hundreds of years ago who used, like, the medical science used to think that people had ichors, and humors, and like later on we discovered no, there is no such a thing. But at the time, that's how you had to progress science, right? And same with astronomy. Like we didn't know how the planets work. We didn't have powerful telescopes. We inferred what we can, and the further back you go in history, the more you have to start seeing these things as allegories, right? No, it's not the sun. Is Ra, right? Or it's Apollo, or it's whatever. So who knows? Maybe 200 years from now, someone will refer to 2020 as the time when people still believed in black eyed kids, when they are actually advanced psycho thought forms of blah, blah, blah. Like someday someone will discover what it actually works or how it actually works. But I'm happy to be here just asking the questions. Someone has
Exactly.
to.
Exactly.
I think this is a good positive note to end the show. Sean, do you have any? Sorry, that I outed you. My sorry.
Hey,
The,
no, it's okay.
well, his name
No,
is
yeah, my
Sean.
gut
Everybody,
instinct.
go ahead.
My gut instinct is that the black eyed kids kind of remind me of Klipothic entities, and for those at home who are not aware of what Klipoth is that in Jewish mysticism, they believe that there is sort of there's a duality of balance where there's life and there's death, and Klipothic entities or Klipoth is the word means husk or shell, and it
Yes.
represents a sort of inverted soulless husk version of reality. And it kind of feels to me like in these stories that these kids are like anti-life or unlife,
The
and it's
tree of
like they
death.
seek out life to destroy it.
Yes. Yeah. I've delved into that idea myself. The Klepo is definitely a potential source for where they come from and even their motivations for what they're doing. So that's a that's I've been there and I've thought about that.
Well,
Yes.
so much for the happy ending that we had given to our show. Let's advance science, the future. No, entities wants to destroy that. Cool. Brian, anything else you want to say, my friend?
No, I'm good. I mean, listen, I really appreciate this, and just as a general thing, I have been extremely fascinated with. I I go on Reddit on occasion. I read through Three Kings. I've watched a few people's videos. Most of them are ridiculous, but let's
I
be
hope they
blunt.
tag them as fiction from now on.
But there's always the cream of the crop, the 5%, the 1%, however many, where you take a step back and you look at it and you say, "Wow, okay, that's really interesting." And then it inspires people, obviously, like the fellow you had on previously, to do legitimate work with these things and
Yes.
try to approach this from, again, that sort of both spiritual and scientific standpoint. And I think we're doing great stuff with this, and so I salute what you've done, and
Thank
it
you.
is an honor for me to be on your podcast.
Likewise, thank you. I think our slogan is gonna be: "We don't have the answers, but someone has to start asking the questions." So
Thank you.
that's what we have to do. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Brian Bethel. Thank you so much for being our second guest. We're on to a successful podcast. Have a great evening, everybody, and I'll see you all in 1 week. Good
And don't
night.
invite any black eyed kids in.
Yeah, if they say, "May I come in?" say, "No. No, you may not. You may not come in." Good night, everybody. Bye.